Welcome back to the discussion Preparing for the Future of Contracting, sponsored by NCMA on Federal News Network. My guest today is Craig Conrad, Chief Executive Officer at National Contract Management Association. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy. We sat down recently with Craig Conrad, CEO of the National Contract Management Association, to hear about the contracting profession rattling changes ahead in the next 5 years. The NCMA white paper, Preparing for the Future of Contracting, has some direct and stark predictions about the effect of technology on contracting. The business of contracting is changing. Technology is becoming a member of the contracting workforce, taking over process-oriented, repetitive, and lower-value tasks from human staff. Robotic process automation, or RPA, is one example of artificial intelligence being applied to contracting. Everywhere from contract closeouts at to finding unpaid invoices at GSA, to background reviews of contractor performance at IRS. Craig, what are leaders doing to bring on technology to change the way contracting is done and the way their workforces operate?
Well, John, one thing they stressed was to avoid automating inefficient processes. Instead, they told us we should make processes more efficient as they are, and only then exploring automating those rules-based parts. A good example came from Melissa Storinsky, who, by the way, is NCMA president as of July 2020, and one would argue that she is someone incredibly focused on supporting our workforce. She has a 4-part test for potential robotic process automation, or RPA, as you've said. Those projects should always include, 1, do we understand and agree on the root cause of the problem we are solving? Number 2, does the estimated volume of transactions benefit from automation to justify that effort? If you can't justify that effort, don't do it. Number 3, how much variance is there in the target process? And number 4, what is the expected ROI for inserting technology? This kind of problem statement approach is beginning to pervade the way contracting leaders approach technology and the way they want the workforce to approach contract requirements. Getting all the stakeholders in the room to identify the real problem they're really expecting to solve with that contract, really testing the problem statements against the on-the-ground needs of the users, both in the office and in the field, and then really refining that problem statement based on that input. It's an iterative process for sure that results in far more appropriate and useful technology. And one would argue, ultimately in the long run, those contract requirements are going to be sharper. It also makes programs and contract managers smarter and better informed while inviting creativity and critical thinking into the process.
You know, Craig, this problem statement approach and iteration sure sounds like the way software development is done today. You know, in 10 years, the whole idea of issuing requirements and pouring them in concrete, not changing, has changed. And this has got to be applied to the world of contract management as well. It's a very agile and flexible environment we're at today, aren't we?
Exactly. And you mentioned agility. Not every contract manager is going to be involved in a major system that you really need a long-term view. Most everything else is like software development. You need to get going, you need to start, you need to test and see what the market and the consumer, and in this case, the consumer is a user of federal government and users of federal government services, to test it, try it, and iterate into something that's better.
Agile software developers always talk about data this and data management and data analytics. How about the role of data in changing the contract management world? Your survey unearthed a particularly focused on analytics and changing contract professionals' works. It's really pushing them towards managing that data, isn't it?
That's right, John, and our interviewees have blueprints already for some powerful data structures. One case that offers promise is the application of data analytics to supercharge the relatively staid approach to market research as it's done today. The new data-enabled market awareness will reveal deeper producer and market insights into pricing, the capabilities, performance, availability, quality, much, much more. In today's environment with COVID-19, it has showed us just how important that data is. So with more powerful spending data, government will be able to truly buy as one, leveraging cross-agency demand to reduce duplicative buying, really end this price-paid variance conversation, and alleviating that workload required to support multiple contracts for similar goods and services. A good example, HHS Accelerate, is successful at combining machine learning, natural language processing, and blockchain, and ultimately laying over the top of that the data analytics required to its contracting function. Its information structure for ingesting and sharing data enabled HHS to analyze 10 years worth of spending. That's huge. That's a lot of man hours, and that brought in terms and conditions and prices paid. This visibility into demand and price variation in contracts across the department for one common purchase area helped HHS negotiate a single new deal that they signed in February of this year, 2020, that will save $30 million over 5 years. That's more than a 50% discount off the current rate, and some really amazing things for American taxpayers.
Given this COVID-19 crisis we're into right now, it seems like this HHS Accelerate is the right program at the right time. I mean, this is the time where everyone's talking about accelerating response, and all of a sudden the ground is laid for them to respond quickly now, isn't it?
Indeed, and the good thing is that they started early. HHS really got out there, and because this is in place, who knows what the outcomes are going to be as a result of applying this during COVID-19. However, I would suggest that in the longer run, other agencies should be really getting out in front of programs like this, because we don't know when the next crisis might show up.
So what you're saying is that contracting leaders are focused both on applying technology to their workload and finding new ways to buy it for their program customers. Is that right?
Indeed, John, and the need to contract innovatively for emerging technologies never has been greater. We've entered perhaps the most exciting era of contracting transformation in the history of the federal government. Just look around, every agency is taking on new and interesting things. So there is so much change and experimentation in the works that it's become rather dizzying for contracting professionals. This pace is particularly pronounced in the Defense Department. Certainly, as I mentioned earlier, the civilian agencies are rapidly catching up and have some of the same challenges. But ultimately, that urgency to buy leading edge technology is driving leaders to encourage and protect risk takers who want to test just how far they can stretch within existing rules and use some of the experimental authorities at their reach. So really, I think ultimately we have come to agree that government's traditional sort of slow to contract, regulation heavy compliance environment has put off some of these emerging technologies and those innovative companies. Senior leaders described in our research innovations and initiatives to streamline and strip their standard operating procedures. The goal is to really get rid of anything redundant. There are many things in there that are already mandated by the FAR, so why duplicate them? And we suggest that there were far more ways to do something beyond what the FAR says. Certainly to do so with the lightest touch possible within the rule, but we're not always necessarily confined and restricted by the FAR saying no. Agencies are testing also a raft of new methods for attracting those innovators, for really to get novel solutions and solve some of the traditional government challenges. As a result, there are hundreds of new innovation hubs connecting startups and programs government-wide. The military, as I mentioned earlier, they're certainly out in front. They're creating really good spaces outside of installations, really close to the warfighter, that are attracting new players. Softwares and AFWorks, groups like that. They're also using some non-FAR buying techniques. We talk certainly about needing to comply with FAR, and there are many, many vehicles that are out there. But there's new ones that have, I won't say new, there have been new applications, and most recently coming to forefront, the OTs, or other transaction authorities. Those are mentioned quite a lot in our survey. Defense departments and defense programs are engaging that OTA consortia to find innovators and run prototype competitions. That's certainly another way to get that startup and the accelerator involved. It brings in small business innovation and certainly attracts those research contracts to award directly in things like pitch days. And we've all seen other great things like that coming out of Major General Holt at the US Air Force and his powerful team. So really, increasingly, senior leaders are providing top cover for their teams to innovate without fear of repercussions. As one of the interviewees said, I'm well aware of the fact that giving my team top cover could mean I get fired. And I'm okay with that because, quite frankly, the only way we're going to move ahead is if people are willing to stick their necks out and create the environment that works. So really, there's a lot of leaders out there that are saying that we have to give top cover. We have to let people experiment. It's the only way we're going to do the best things on behalf of the taxpayer. Another one of our interviewees went further and they said the benefit of innovation is far outweighed by the risks of any protest they might lose. You think about that, right? The chances of going to court and being dragged out in the public sector, in the public mind, is risky, but the benefits that we're going to gain as a nation are far greater. Finally, I would say that another has said that she tells her team, if it's not illegal, try it. We'll talk more about this later on in the workforce in this program and what the changes that they're faced with.
Great. My guest today is Craig Conrad, Chief Executive Officer at the National Contract Management Association. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy, on the discussion, Preparing for the Future of Contracting, sponsored by NCMA on Federal News Network.